Good evening. Today's class is today's topic is foreign direct investment by multinational enterprises. When we talk about international business and global business strategies, foreign direct investment is one of the most popular topics because many companies have set up their factories in the form of FDI through Greenfield Investment or acquisition of companies in foreign countries. The volume of foreign direct investment has gone up substantially by leaps and bounds during last 1 or 2 months. During last couple of years before COVID-19 crisis. Foreign direct investment has been growing all over the world, across the countries. So after COVID or during the crisis time, FDI has declined. The total flow of FDI has declined in almost every country because companies are thinking about alternative strategies to succeed in the of COVID-19. So let's look at what is foreign direct investment and the various dimensions of foreign direct investment and determinants of foreign direct investment, what actually motivate companies to think about foreign direct investment when they have a market, when they have a business opportunity in their own country, and so on. Yeah, so let's start with the brief discussion of Starbucks. I believe I played the Starbucks video in Australia, right? Starbucks expansion into Australia. We all watched that, right?
Yeah, we watched it a few classes ago.
Yeah. So Starbucks strategy, Starbucks has been expanding globally in various countries with their coffee and blended coffees. And Starbucks has been offering superior customer service according to Starbucks management policy, and they have paid attention, or they claim, or they always talk about attention given for hiring, training, and compensation, and motivation of employees, and so on. And they had different strategies in different countries wherever they expanded. In Britain, Japan, Thailand, Korea, Australia, they expanded to all these countries and several other countries too. And it was a coffee shop established in Seattle, Washington, and the expansion into several countries like Japan, Britain, Thailand, and Korea were in the form of FDI. They did not really prefer franchising when they expanded into these countries. They invested their money and expanded. Initial expansion to these countries was investment by Starbucks in the form of foreign direct investment to open their stores instead of franchisee. Franchisee is not a foreign direct investment. Franchisee is not an example for foreign direct investment. Franchisee is a different form of expansion. Foreign direct investment simply means expanding into a foreign country with your own investment. You spend your own money and expand and set up everything. It can be factory, or it can be outlet like Starbucks outlet, or it can be your own branch, or your own outlet. So rather than going to the franchisee mode, or you can also say rather than going through licensing mode, FDI means you invest your own money. In licensing and franchising, you are not investing your own money. You are partnering up with a local partner. Local partner will invest money. That's the theory of franchising and licensing. But in FDI, you yourself or your company, in this case, Starbucks is expanding globally. Starbucks is investing their money in foreign market and setting up their facilities in foreign markets. So that is FDI. That's an example for FDI. And they expanded into many countries with FDI. In several countries, they succeeded, but some countries like Australia, they failed. What is foreign direct investments? Let's look at what is foreign direct investment. A company acquiring another company in a foreign market to expand into that country is an example for foreign direct investment. Another example is a firm creating a greenfield operations in a different country, which means you invest your own money. That is greenfield investment. and expand into foreign country. So this is called Greenfield Investment. And, it's FDI is like a coin. Coin has two sides. So FDI coin has two sides. On one hand, Greenfield Investment, and the other side, the other hand, you will see, acquisitions. So you can see that acquisitions by companies is an example for FDI. On the other hand, Greenfield Investment by your own company. Greenfield Investment simply means you invest your money and set up everything from scratch. So that's an example for Greenfield Investment. I tell you an example for Greenfield Investment that I know and that I always talk about, because I lived in Japan and I know a lot of Japanese businesses. Japanese company, the Japanese icon, Toyota. Toyota, when they expanded into America, when they internationalized their business, they decided to set up a factory in America in Kentucky states in the US. Kentucky factory of Toyota was established as a greenfield investment. That simply means Toyota transferred their money from Japan. Toyota invested their money from Japan in Kentucky, and from scratch, from zero, they decided to set up their factory in Kentucky rather than buying an American company. And they built everything, from the ground, or they did all the groundwork and set up everything from zero, from ground level. So that kind of example is called as greenfield investment. Can you name some other greenfield investments? Can you some examples for greenfield investment?
I think that the textbook talks about Nissan. For example, Toyota and Nissan responded to investment by Honda in the United States and Europe. It's like the FDI example.
Specific example. So, like Toyota's expansion is, I told you, Toyota's expansion into Kentucky in the US. It's a classic example for greenfield investment. And likewise, in case if we have any specific example, like, some company setting up their offices, setting up their factories in a foreign market, it could be American company in a foreign country, or it could be a foreign company in America. So in case if you can recall, or if you are aware of some examples, share with the class. Others, no more examples? See, almost all the traditional forms of foreign expansion is actually an example for greenfield investment. Almost every company. Suppose in case if you are not acquiring a foreign company in a foreign country, that means you are investing in the form of greenfield investment. Even Starbucks expansion into Australia, Starbucks is, if Starbucks did not acquire Australian companies to expand into Australia, and if Starbucks did not in case if Starbucks did not open franchisee stores, if Starbucks, instead of that, if Starbucks opened their own outlets instead of franchising, they are all part of greenfield investments. Acquisition, franchising, licensing, they are not part of greenfield investment. But in case if a company is expanding without acquisition, company is expanding without licensing and franchising, so in that case, they are all example for greenfield investment. And a lot of companies expand through greenfield investment. And original expansion, mostly when a company enter into a foreign market first time, that is likely to be greenfield investment, because many companies prefer greenfield investment for the first expansion, and later, once they set up their foothold, they might think about franchising and licensing in that country. They might think about acquisition and those kind of things as part of their policy or strategy to expand later or strengthen their business later. But initial expansion is normally a greenfield investment, which is an example for foreign direct investments. Yeah, a company creating a subsidiary in a different country, that is an example for foreign direct investment. Of course, when you undertake a greenfield investment or when you acquire a foreign company, you are actually creating a subsidiary or a branch of your company in that country. The firm has significant control of its foreign operation, and firm can affect managerial decisions of foreign operations. Yeah. So as a result of foreign direct investment, or a company normally undertake foreign direct investment when a company want to have significant control of its foreign operations. You want to control your foreign businesses, you think about for FDI. But if you don't want control, you can think about franchising or licensing. You can think about those kind of modes when you don't want control. But when you want to have control, you invest your money and you control everything and you take then their profits. A company can affect managerial decision of foreign operation. Foreign direct investment, according to US Department of Commerce, foreign direct investment is considered as, yeah. So, I mean, an investment is considered as foreign direct investment or FDI whenever an organization takes an interest or a stake or a share of 10% or more in a foreign company. Yeah, so here we go with the definition of FDI according to the US Department of Commerce. According to the US Department of Commerce, I repeat, whenever a company is taking more than 10% or 10% or more financial stake in a foreign company, all such transactions are considered as example for FDI. This is in the case of acquisition. So when a company buys more than 10% in a foreign company, it is an acquisition actually, and it is an example for FDI. In addition to this, a company can set up their operations in foreign country as greenfield investment. That is also an FDI. That is also called as FDI. So FDI has two dimensions or two sides. On one side, greenfield investment, that's an FDI. On other side, when a company is buying financial stake in a foreign company, that if that stake or if that percentage of shares that the company is acquiring is, if it is 10% or more, that's also considered as an example for FDI. FDI can be classified as horizontal FDI and vertical FDI. So it's a classification of foreign direct investment into horizontal FDI and vertical FDI. So let's look at what is horizontal FDI and what is vertical FDI.
Professor, excuse
Yeah.
me. The book taught example of an acquisition example of Unilever, that the acquisition of Kibon in Brazil in 1997, and their strong presence in Latin America.
Yes.
I think that Unilever is like an example of acquisition.
Yes.
Yes. And the other, there's also the establishment of a project of Mercedes-Benz in a plant in Alabama.
Yes.
That's an example of Greenfield Investment.
Yes. 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 Okay, so let's move on to discuss horizontal FDI. So FDI can be classified into horizontal and vertical FDI. And first we look at what is horizontal FDI. Horizontal FDI occurs when the multinational enterprise, when a multinational enterprise or when a big company, MNE stands for multi or multinational enterprise, enters a foreign country to produce the same products produced at home or offer the same service in a foreign country that it does at home. So this is what, an example for horizontal FDI, or this is horizontal FDI. It represents a geographical diversification of the MNE's established domestic product line. Yeah. So yeah, you can see that a geographical diversification of the MNE's established domestic product line. So here, what is suppose you are producing cement in your country. Let's say Mexico has a cement company called Cemex. So let's say Mexican company Cemex produces cement in Mexico, and then they are setting up their facilities in the US to manufacture the same product in the US. In that case, you can simply call it as an example for horizontal FDI. And it represents a geographical diversification of the MNE's established domestic product line. So it simply means that it represents a geographical diversification of the MNE's established domestic product line. So yeah, it's a product line based thing. I mean, it's geographical diversification, but you're doing the same thing in a foreign country, and it is called as, so it can be called as horizontal FDI. Horizontal FDI, factors that determine whether a company has to invest abroad in the form of FDI. So here, what are the factors that determine, as far as a company is concerned, to invest abroad? Company has to make a decision whether to invest abroad, if they decide how much to invest abroad, and so on. And what form to invest abroad, whether they should set up Greenfield Investment or whether they should look for a company to acquire, and so on. So factors that help a company to determine such things include cost of transportation, strategic rivalry, product life cycle, and location. So let's look at this one by one. Cost of transportation. What does it mean by, and how does cost of transportation determine a company's decision? Yeah, so I have mentioned here, somebody can read this and can decide. For example, if a company is thinking about expanding into global markets, company has to decide whether they are going to export or whether they are going to do the licensing or franchising, or whether they're going to do the strategic alliance, or whether they will go ahead with the FDI. FDI, they undertake FDI normally when they have long-term business interest. Because when you have short-term business interest, you normally do not undertake FDI, but you have a business plan to generate substantial amount of profit from so and so market in long-term basis. You will think about foreign direct investment either in the form of greenfield investment or in the form of international acquisitions. And there are certain factors that determine and that help you to decide whether you want to undertake FDI, whether you want to, think about other modes of operations like licensing or franchising or any other modes of entry. So one of the important factors is cost of transportation. So cost of transportation is a factor that help you to decide whether you want to export or whether you want to do the FDI. I'll tell you an example. You know that I lived in Japan. When I used to live in Japan, I used to look at, I went to Toyota factory a couple of times and I studied what Toyota is doing. I went to the Japanese port a couple of times. I used to take my MBA student to the Japanese port to understand what is being exported from Japan to other countries. And once when I went to Japanese port, Osaka port in Japan, so we found that a lot of cars, Toyota cars are exported from Japan to Australia. This was 10 years ago, okay. So Australia is not far from Japan. So that is the reason Toyota found that they can export Toyota cars from Japan to Australia and still they can sell in Australia at competitive price. And Australia, I mean, that was their initial stages of, that was their old days of doing business. And they were exporting cars from Japan to Australia. Later, after that, they have set up their factory in Australia. Currently, they have a factory in Australia. But they used to export from Japan to Australia because it was far, it was not far. Australia is not that far from Japan. But at the same time, Toyota was not keen to export cars from Japan to the United States. They decided to set up factory in the US way back, long ago, many, many years ago, they set up their factory in the US. Because US geographically, US is far, cost of transportation, cost of export is more if they have to export cars from Japan to the US, plus US is a big market, 300 million people, more than 300 million people. So it's a big market compared to Australia. Australia doesn't have that many people. So it is an opportunity for Toyota to explore a big market like the US, and cost of transportation was one of the factor that help companies to decide. When transportation costs are high, when transportation costs are high, companies will think about FDI instead of doing exporting. When transportation costs are low, companies will think about exporting. So I talked about Toyota's example, Toyota's export to Australia versus Toyota's FDI in the US. Can you think about any example of any company that you know, maybe some Puerto Rican company or some US company that you know how they do businesses in different countries? Did you understand my point? Exporting versus FDI? Transportation is a factor. Cost of transportation is a factor that helps you to decide whether you will do exporting or FDI. Now it is your turn to talk about some examples.
Professor, examples of exporting or comparing with FDI? I'm confused with that there.
Comparing with FDI. I compared Toyota's case with Toyota's FDI with Toyota's exports, right?
Okay.
What did I tell? So if you don't have any understanding, so just explain what did I tell and what did you understand?
Okay. No, I would just like did not hear well if it was the example. It was just some company.
What I'm trying to tell you is that in case, it may not be easy for you to get an example like what I said. So in case, if you don't getting that example, so I would like to understand whether you follow my example. Can you tell me what did you understand when I was explaining Toyota's case?
No, that's okay. I just did not understand because my internet wasn't stable, but I'm sorry.
Someone from the class, can you tell me, can you explain what did you understand about Toyota's business in Australia? What Toyota does, how does Toyota sell in Australia from Japan, and how Toyota is doing business in the US? Compare that, what I explained. What did I explain?
You mentioned that because of the proximity with Australia, Toyota was basically sending their cars already made to Australia, whereas in other places in the world it may be more profitable to just have a factory and make them locally.
Yeah, any other answer? Someone else? The same example that I was talking about since the beginning of my lecture, Toyota's factory in Kentucky was set up way back, long ago, because Toyota realized that the cost of transportation of cars from Japan to the US is going to be much more compared to the price or the cost at which they can produce car in the US and sell in the US. So that motivated Toyota to set up the car factory in the US. However, they didn't do that long ago or long back. When they set up their factory in the US, they didn't set up their factory in Australia, because cost of transportation from Japan to Australia is not much because of proximity. Geographic distance is not much. So Australia is somewhere close to Japan. So they decided to export cars made in Japan were exported to Australia for several years. And they were finding it okay and reasonable and fine. They were doing business in Australia that way. And cost of transportation was one of the factor. And several companies, yeah.
That sample is very similar to those industry that they have products that they sell like cement and drinks. That kind of industry that sell product of cement and drinks, they have a high transportation cost. For that reason, it becomes unprofitable
Yes.
to ship those products.
Yes. Yeah, if you have products like cement or any heavy items and those kind of things, you need to have production facility in a foreign country if you have a long-term business interest. For example, if a Mexican company want to transport cement to Europe or Asia, it's going to be very expensive. So it makes sense for them to set up a factory in Asia or Europe. So so many other several other products too. But even if Mexican company, suppose if Mexican company want to expand into the US, even if they don't set up a factory in the US, it's fine, because US is geographically proximate. Cost of transportation will be less for a Mexican company, even if Mexican company is producing in Mexico and export from Mexico to the US, that's perfectly fine. But to expand into Europe or Asia, Mexican company needs, in case if they have a long-term business interest, they might need a factory in Asia or Europe and those kind of places. Okay, so next point is strategic rivalry and FDI. Strategic rivalry, there is also a theory called Nickelbacker theory. And this theory and the concept of strategic rivalry explain the rationale or FDI based on the idea that FDI flows are a reflection of strategic rivalry between firms in the global markets. Yeah. So FDI flows are a reflection of strategic rivalry between firms in the global market. Yeah, so suppose in case if a companies are having competition, and if company A is going to global market or entering the global market, company B also will try similar routes to expand into foreign market, because company A is trying to build their brand and generate substantial revenue from foreign market and create a global brand. Company B, their competitor, also will have to follow similar path. Otherwise, they might be losers in long run. So companies normally watch their competitors closely and make their business plan accordingly. Horizontal foreign direct investment. Product life cycle. Vernon's theory. This theory was developed by Raymond Vernon in mid-1960. As the product life cycle develops, the cost advantage will change accordingly, and a comparative advantage in innovative capacity may be offset by a cost disadvantage. So we have already discussed this briefly, I believe. So yeah, so almost every company goes through this product life cycle, because normally companies launch a product, that is the introduction stage. Then there is a growth stage, there's a maturity stage, and yeah, so these are all different stages. Vertical direct investments. Backward and forward. Yeah, so this is the other type of FDI. And vertical foreign direct investment, backward vertical foreign direct investment simply means that investments into industry that provides inputs into a firm's domestic production, typically extractive industries. Yeah, so here, this is a vertical foreign direct investment, and an example is, for example, you think about investing in an industry that provides inputs to a firm's domestic production, in extraction industries, for example. One of the main goals of investing your money in a foreign country is to ensure inputs for your company, because that inputs may not be available in your country, or sometimes better quality inputs or raw material may be available in a foreign country. So you will invest, you will do some extraction activity or something like that in a foreign country to get raw material or to get inputs, and such kind of things can be called as backward vertical direct investment. So there was a case, I believe it was presented by Wilfredo. There was a case about a fertilizer company investing in Middle East countries like Oman to ensure high quality raw material from Oman. So such kind of investment can be done, like many oil companies, many British Petroleum, for example, British Petroleum, they have such investment in Middle East countries to extract raw oil or petroleum. And that kind of investment or FDI, that kind of foreign direct investment can be called as backward vertical foreign direct investment. And the next type of FDI is forward vertical FDI. Forward vertical FDI is nothing but an FDI or an investment in an industry that utilizes the output from a company's domestic production. Yeah, so for example, you invest your money in the form of FDI in a foreign country for sales and distribution. Let's say you have a long-term plan, long-term interest in a particular country, you invest your money, set up your branches for sales and distribution rather than giving such rights for distributors or dealers in a foreign market. Instead of appointing dealers and distributors, you invest your own money and set up your own sales and distribution channel in a foreign country. When you do that, it is called as vertical forward direct investment, or it can be called as vertical forward vertical direct investment. FDI, flow versus stock. FDI occurs when a company invests directly in facilities to produce or market a product in a foreign country. And FDI, flow and stock, amount of FDI over a period of time, that is called as flow, and total accumulated value of a foreign owned assets at a given point of time, that is called as FDI stock. These are just conceptual, these are just concepts. You don't need to worry too much about what is FDI flow and what is stock, just go by the literary meaning of the word flow and stock. Yeah, so normally FDI is not a typical investment by individuals or firms or public bodies with a short-term interest or short-term sales interest in foreign financial instruments. Such short-term investments, like 1%, you buy 50 shares, 500 shares of a company, such investment is called as foreign portfolio investment. Let's say if Yarlin or Norberto or Wilfredo or Jaffet want to, or Gabriel want to buy some 1,000 shares of a company listed in London Stock Exchange or Tokyo Stock Exchange, that is not considered as FDI. That is an example for foreign portfolio investment. It's a portfolio. But if that investment exceeds 10% shares in a company, listed in a foreign stock exchange and all, then it is called as foreign direct investment. But if it is less than 10%, it is simply called as foreign portfolio investment. So foreign portfolio investment is an investment with a short-term interest, and foreign direct investment is an investment with long-term interest. Why is FDI important? Firms want a presence in foreign markets because this is their interest. Companies are interested in building global brands and generate substantial revenue from foreign markets. Companies want control over growth of these foreign markets. And this helps them to gain first mover advantage. This helps them to ward off competitors and to determine locations, advertising, and other related strategic decisions in the firm's interest. Yeah, so first mover advantage. First mover to different foreign markets. Suppose if you enter into different foreign markets as a first mover than your strong competitors, you have a first mover advantage. This will help you. Trends in FDI, flow and stock increased the last 20 years. In spite of decline of trade barriers, FDI has grown more rapidly than world trade because businesses fear protectionist pressures. FDI is seen as a way of circumventing trade barriers. And dramatic political and economic changes in many parts of the world. Yeah, so these are all different factors or important factors. Globalization of the world economy has raised the vision of companies, and many companies see the entire world as their markets. With the globalization captured momentum, many companies realize that there could be better opportunities in foreign countries. So this also motivated companies to think about FDI. Yeah. And FDI had actually grown more rapidly than exporting. The total volume of FDI, the total annual average compound growth of FDI recorded much more than the total average compound growth of exports. So now let's look at determinants of FDI. At a very basic level, the size of a host country in terms of aggregate and per capita national income, that is gross domestic product, and proximity of the host country to investing countries are two key determinants of inward FDI. Size of the host country in terms of aggregate national income, that attracts a lot of multinational companies to countries. So let me ask two questions. Why do China attract FDI and why does the US attract FDI? Can you link with this point?
Professor, for example, the book said that China has been the largest among the host of FDI developing countries. This I think that this have been changed in the past month because of the coronavirus.
No, we are not talking about the coronavirus situation. I'm talking about the last 20 years. So let's say last 20 years. Coronavirus problem will be partly over. It's going to be 90 or 99% will be over once everybody gets vaccine. By 2021, by December 2021, coronavirus is going to be, the problem is going to be over. So I don't think that by 2022, people will be worried about coronavirus. So business will be, normal by 2022. So we can expect.
Well, I'm referring about the video that you shared that Japan right now is like giving the company that have that they have on China, they giving like subsidy and money so they can go to other country to develop and all that stuff.
Yeah, that is a diplomatic move of Japan or a strategic decision of Japan to help Japanese companies to think about some other countries as production destination. So that is more diplomatic rather than so we will discuss that a little bit later. So now what we are talking is that, like, for example, why did Toyota set up a company? There are two factors. Set up a company in Kentucky in the US. Previously, we talked about cost of transportation from Japan to the US. It was high, so they decided to set up. And now we talk about the market size of America, size of the host country. So is America a very, I mean, size of the host country? Is it the size of America is big enough? And likewise, I tell you another example. General Motors, American car company, they went to China and they set up their factory in collaboration. Of course, it was equity joint venture. So General Motors make cars in China. So is it because Chinese market size, like we have mentioned, size of the host country, size of the host country in terms of aggregate and per capita GDP, both aggregate and per capita GDP, in terms of size of the economy is calculated using this statistics. And do you think that China attracts many foreign direct investment from foreign companies because of the size of the China? Does the same thing goes for US? Why companies are not going to Dominican Republic for FDI? Why companies are not going to Peru for FDI? But again, many companies are going to Brazil for FDI. Many companies are going to India for FDI. Many companies have invested their money in the form of FDI in countries like India, Brazil, China, US, and so on. So how do you relate that with this particular point in the PPT? Hmm?
I mean, I would say it's not completely clear to me, but at least when you compare, like you mentioned, you compare the U.S. to China, I could say that in the case of the U.S., companies are looking more for the proximity to the market. So in that sense, it would be um, um, relative or similar to the aggregate per capita of the GDP. In the case of China, I would say it's just basically a thing about the experience, the low regulations, the cost of manufacturing in general that make it attractive. I wouldn't say it's a clean cut for many other countries though, but at least in China, that's what I would say.
To Jarlin or Noberto, how do you respond to this question?
Yeah, after I examined the chapter, I think that China has a brings a benefit in terms of investment in R&D, because it has low R&D costs, availability and quality of the local R&D workforce, and protection of intellectual property that makes investment attractive to other countries.
Mm-hmm. Jarlin?
I'm sorry, Professor, my internet is unstable right now. I couldn't listen too much of my of Gabriela and Norberto's side, but I think it's like you said, for the GDP. I'm reading that the United States is #1 in the GDP tables, then China and Japan. So Brazil and India is in the top 10. So I think it's for that.
Yes, that's correct. Jarlin is absolutely right, because when companies look at the top countries in total GDP, of course, total GDP and per capita GDP, both are important, and companies will definitely look at total GDP in different countries. When companies look at that, countries like China, China, India, Brazil, or US is #1 in total GDP in the world. Total GDP table, if you look at, US is #1, China is #2, and India maybe 5 or 6, and Brazil maybe 8 or 9, something like that. So or 7 or 8. So these kind of things. These are important for companies because they will think about FDI in a country only if there is a big market size. So that is the total GDP is an indicator of it. So otherwise they will not invest their money because FDI is a long-term investment. It is not a short-term investment. Determinants of FDI. Yeah, beyond those two essentially exogenous forces that we discussed in the previous slides, like total GDP and per capita GDP, a number of other factors also play important role in attracting foreign direct investments. We classify these factors as law, rules, and regulations. These are also important because companies will go to countries where they can do business easily. In case if there's a lot of bureaucracy, companies will not go there with FDI. Administrative procedures and efficiency, they are also important. Yeah, in case if government rules are very, very strict, like in Venezuela, the rules are very strict for multinational companies. In case if a foreign company is going there, Venezuelan government is very strict about the rules. They might even, suppose in case if they find some problem, some issue, they might even think about freezing your bank account in countries like Venezuela. So in case if there are some examples of freezing a foreign company's bank account in a foreign country, many foreign companies will be scared. They will not go to those countries because easiness of doing business is very important. So they will think about going to those countries with relatively easy administrative procedures and efficient procedures, and infrastructure related factors also important. Cost of resources. Yes, cost of resources. For example, FDI, many companies, why did many companies go to China to FDI is because cost of resources. Cost of resources means wage rate and cost of land. China has abundant supply of land, millions of acres or hectares of land. So it's very cheap. Suppose if you want to set up a factory in China and if you want to lease some land, you can get land for lease, or government gives approval, you can even buy, but there's prices of that land. It can be lease price or buying price. It's cheap, it's not expensive. So especially if you go to villages, because China is a gigantic country. And labor cost, China has 1.3 billion people. So because of 1.3 billion people are available to work at relatively competitive salaries. So as a result, companies can hire a lot of people in a country like China at very competitive wage rate. So cost of production, cost of resources will be less. And that attracted many foreign companies to set up their factory in China. So we have seen, like I also mentioned an example, I believe before, when I was in Japan, I bought a Canon camera. Canon is a Japanese brand, and I bought in Canon's directly on store outlet in Japan. And then I opened the packet and it says made in China. I didn't buy in China, I bought in Japan. It's a Japanese brand. And even a Japanese brand like Canon, they are producing in China and exporting back to the Japan, mainly because of cost of resources. So now the article that Wilfredo is talking about, the article that I shared, Japanese government announced decision to help Japanese companies to switch production base from China to other countries because of the COVID crisis. That is the news I shared with, because Japan or Japanese government didn't like the fact that China didn't inform COVID crisis and seriousness of the crisis on time to the rest of the world. So this reaction from Japan is also an action diplomatic action against the Chinese diplomacy or Chinese government. So because the Japanese government says that we would finance Japanese companies if they want to switch their production base from China to other countries. So that's a very interesting move. Perhaps you can talk about that. Would you like to talk about what did you get time to read that article? Wilfred already talked about it. I would like to hear from others.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that maybe because of COVID, the relationship of Japan and China will be affected in the next few months, maybe. And things were looking good for both nations, both um, in the earlier month.
I mean, relationship, Japan, it's not, that relationship is not actually next few months. So this is going to be a serious issue. Once everything gets settled, I strongly believe, or I think that the world is going to be divided more strongly with two bipolar teams. Countries like US and Japan will team up together, and some countries will team up with China, but China may not get a lot of support from several countries now because of COVID crisis, because many country government believe that China did not inform the crisis and seriousness of the issue on time. So there is going to be, this decision of the Japanese government to help Japanese companies to move out from China, production facility from China. It has far-reaching consequences. It's not just 1 or 2 months. COVID crisis is going to be maybe 6 more months or 8 more months, but or maybe by December it should be normal. But moving production base from China by Japanese companies or even some American companies will do that, and are in the process. They are in the process of doing that. If they get government support, they will do that. And some might remain there, but some will move out from China. So this is a diplomatic action. So this is.
Well, I think that the most important part of the article is that they are giving 2 billion for those companies that are shifting their production back to Japan. So that is a lot of money. So like all that money that will motivate those companies to go to Japan and shift their production from China.
Yes, definitely, you are right. And similar situation with American companies, because currently there are several American companies producing in China, and if American government is going to give them some support, they will also move out from China. They might move. Some of them might move back to the US. Some of them might move to some other countries, because they can think about producing in Thailand or India or some other countries. So instead of China, so they might do that also.
Yeah, and that will make, I think that will move China from the table. I think that if they are number 2, they will roll down because of that.
Yes, there will be some consequences. Yes, but now currently, China is spared from the COVID crisis. Now you can see 500,000 people died in the US, and how many people died in China. So so China, even the virus originated from China, they made sure that people are not dying in China. So beyond a limit. So these are all going to have some consequences. But now every country leader, they are peaceful. They are trying to keep peace now, because they have to control the disease. So they have to control the pandemic. Yeah. So, but once everything is normalized, this will have some kind of reactions from different circle, because it's not easy for the government leaders to forget such things. Even in our daily life, if somebody is attacking you directly or indirectly from back or front, if you are not, sometimes you are not in a position to react back within 1 hour or within 1 day, but you might keep that in your mind, and you might have some kind of revengeful feeling to attack that person maybe after 1 or 2 years when you get a chance. Sometimes it happens, and this is going to happen in the case of many countries, and many countries will take actions against China once people in those countries get vaccinated, and once everything is normal, there are going to be some actions and reactions against China and some of these production units moving out from China, kind of things. There will be some actions like that we can expect, and one can definitely expect some changes and some revolutionary restructuring of businesses by many companies with the support of their governments. So, yeah, form of FDI, as I mentioned before, Greenfield versus acquisition. These are two different forms of FDI. Greenfield investment, most of the Greenfield investments undertaken by multinational companies are in developing countries. And such a Greenfield investment involves establishment of a completely new operations in a foreign land. Mergers and acquisitions or acquisition. So foreign direct investment can occur through acquisition, and it's relatively quicker to execute. Foreign firms have valuable strategic assets. They believe they can increase the efficiency of the acquired company. More prevalent in developed countries. Yeah, so several acquisitions. FDI forms acquisition is a cross-border investment in which a foreign investor acquires and establishes local firms and make the acquired local firm subsidiary business with its global portfolio. Embodiment to sale of know-how. Yeah, here, when you think about FDI, you have different options. Classic option is Greenfield investment or acquisition, and embodiment to the sale of know-how. So here, for example, risk giving away know-how to competitors. Licensing implies law control over foreign entry. Yeah, so for example, I tell you, we are actually comparing licensing versus FDI now. Previously, we compared, when I started my lecture, I compared exporting versus FDI. Under what situation you will think about exporting, under what situation you will think about FDI. Now I'm going to decide, I'm going to discuss, or I'm discussing under what condition you will think about licensing your business. Licensing means you authorize a local company in a foreign country to manufacture your product. That is licensing. It can also be called as contract manufacturing. So when your know-how means technology. When you have a business in technology intensive industry, you will think about FDI. But when you have a business which is not really high tech, then what happens is you will think about FDI. I mean, suppose you are not worried about someone else is stealing your technology or stealing your know-how. If you are not worried about, you can think about licensing. Licensing means authorizing a local company. For example, Nike shoe company, they have authorized, they have given license to Chinese companies or Vietnamese companies to manufacture shoes in China or Vietnam. H&M, the textile company from Sweden, they have done the same thing. They have licensed their textile garment making facility or market, garment making to some local companies in some Asian countries. They have also done it. And yeah, so we're very similar situation. So yeah, so you can understand this. When you think about, it's very simple. In labor intensive industries, you can think about licensing, but in technology intensive industries, FDI is advisable. For example, car making, FDI is advisable because it's a technology intensive industry. Shoe making, garment making, it's a labor intensive industries. There are examples for labor intensive industries. So even if you don't do FDI, you can think about licensing and labor intensive industries like shoe making or garment making, so in such any labor intensive industries, licensing is fine. You don't have to necessarily think about FDI. FDI, when and why? This is more or less like a summary of what we have been discussing. When transportation costs are high between two different countries, FDI is advisable. And another point with reference to market imperfections, impediment to the free flow of products between nations, impediment to the sale of know-how, internalization theory, follow the lead of a competitor, strategic rivalry. For example, product life cycle doesn't explain when it is profitable to invest abroad. For example, you can see when there are restrictions or when there are impediments. So market imperfection, we are going back to market imperfection, under market imperfection, under internalize, there is also theory called internalization theory. It's not internationalization theory. Market imperfection, there could be impediments or controls to the free flow of products between countries. When there are controls for importing, sometimes, for example, there are tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers on importing. If a particular commodity, if there are restrictions for importing in a specific country, then you have to think about FDI. Because if customs taxes on a particular item is very high, exporting that product to that particular country will be very expensive because importer has to pay very high customs tax. As a result, price of that product in that country will be very high. So it's going to be a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, Professor, giving a little memory from chapter 10 that I remember that they talk about the product life cycle. I remember that they have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 cycle. So answering the question, like when it could be, I don't know, it also depends on which cycle the company is. Probably from cycle 3 or 4, 5, and 6, it will be profitable for the company to invest abroad.
Yes, I agree with you. So in addition, I would like to give you an example. For example, I tell you, importing car is an expensive deal, an expensive business in Indian market, for example, because customs tax on car import is very, very high. Government of India has kept customs tax on car import very, very high. So if American or Japanese or European car making companies, if they are exporting cars from those countries to India, the importers in India will have to pay very high customs tax. So as a result, car price, imported car price is very high. So companies have devised the strategy of FDI, and foreign companies have set up car manufacturing facility in India. Almost every European or American car company or Japanese car company, they make or they manufacture cars in India. Those are classic examples for FDI in automobile industry in India. Because if they don't make cars in India, importers have to pay very high customs tax. So companies have to think about FDI. This is also because government in India want to encourage more employment opportunity. Government think that if foreign companies comes and set up their factories in India, more people will get jobs instead of importing. That's what government think. And because government think that way, government want to encourage FDI in automobile industry, but government doesn't want to encourage import of cars. So this is a government policy. So to counterattack or to manage this government policy or to leverage the opportunity, foreign car companies, they have set up their factories in Indian market by way of FDI. So this is a strategic move of foreign car companies. It can be Germany's Volkswagen, it can be American car company or Japanese companies like Honda. They all have factory in India because the companies find it easy to make cars, because otherwise if they have to export, import taxes are very high. So price of the imported cars would be very high. Transportation cost plus taxes very high. So it makes sense for foreign car companies to produce cars in Indian market. This is what they do.
Yeah, well, yeah. In case for the tax part, I remember that when I made the presentation about the ABC Limited, I remember that some of the factors in India were the local taxes, because they have changed the regime about the value added tax. They added the VAT to their regime, and that kind of action are affecting the companies of the automotive company.
Yes, yes. Right. And another point is, you're right. Another point is location specific advantages like natural resources. Your ABC example is also part of that. Sometimes companies identify that this particular country or some countries have natural resources. For example, Brazil has certain minerals. Russia has certain minerals. Russia has oil. Venezuela has oil. So when some companies find that there are natural resources available in some countries, they go to that country with FDI. This is another example. Decision framework. How high are transportation costs and tariffs? Yeah. So this is like, whether you want to export or whether you want to license or whether you want to FDI. So how do you decide? This picture, this figure will help you to decide.
Yeah, Professor, I don't understand the second question because it said that it's known how amenable to licensing, and if it yes, you go horizontal, and also if it yes, you can go to is it tight control or foreign operation required. So even though if it's yes or yes, you can go to you have the option of horizontal FDI or the next question.
I mean, there is a mistake in that. So, I mean, so you have, what you have to understand is that, for example, see, in a layman's words, I can explain this in a layman's words. What you have to understand is that, suppose licensing means there is a risk of stealing your technology, because licensing means you are, you are actually, so it's a kind of,
Of sharing your intellectual property.
yeah. So suppose you are worried about your intellectual property, worried about someone stealing your intellectual property, then, so you will think about FDI in that case. So know-how means your intellectual property, your technology. So it can be copyright, or it can be patent, it can be any of those kind of intellectual property. If you think that, for example, you're operating in pharmaceutical industry, patents are important. You cannot think about licensing in pharmaceutical industry. Pharmaceutical companies never do licensing because they are technology intensive. They have patent orientation. So in that case, you will think about FDI only, so that is the question there. So and another question is, when you want to have foreign control, when you have to have control, then you think about FDI. But you are not concerned about control, then you think about licensing. So these are all, yeah. So this particular slide, the slide that I'm using is from McGraw-Hill. So there could be some issue. Today's slide I'm using from McGraw-Hill. Yeah. So do you understand now, everybody, or you want me to explain further, or are you clear? And for example, here export is also compared when there are high transportation costs and tariffs. If the transportation costs and tariffs are low, you will do export. That should be your strategy. But if high transportation costs and tariffs are high, you will think about FDI or licensing. So you need to take a decision that way. When import tariffs are high, you will not think about exporting. I told you example of India for car import. Import tariffs are high. Import tariff means taxes. When import tariffs are high for importing cars in India, foreign companies will have to think about either FDI or licensing. Those are two options. So, but in car making, companies never do licensing. So you will think about FDI because you will lose your technology. You will lose your intellectual property. If you do licensing in car making, if you do licensing in pharmaceutical industry, you will lose your intellectual property rights. So you will think about FDI. Okay, now two questions for you to discuss and answer. First question is, examine the factors affecting the FDI flow into a developing country. So I see 5 people today: Jarlene, Jafet, Wilfredo, Gabriel, and Noberto. Let me start with Jarlene. Jarlene, can you answer this question? What are the factors affecting FDI flows in a developing country? Do you think that developing country need to attract FDI? Yes or no? And what factors will determine what will help them to attract FDI if they want to attract FDI? Or in some sectors, some developing country governments like to attract FDI in some sectors, but some other sectors, they don't want FDI. So Jarlene and Jafet, you answer question number 1, and others can answer question number 2. I think Jarlin is not there.
Sorry, Professor, I'm here. Still struggling with the internet.
Yeah. Can you answer question number 1?
So, you mean positive or negative, or either?
Yeah, like I already asked the question twice, right? So, what are the factors that attract or that affect the FDI flow into a developing country? And do you think that FDI is good from the point of view of people in developing country, or what sectors probably, what the basic question is, what factors determine the FDI flow into developing country? That's the basic question. And then you can also talk about what sectors normally developing countries attract, or they like to attract FDI in what sectors. So some sectors they don't want to attract FDI also. So you can also compare and give some perspectives.
So for developing countries, I think that the government may be affecting the FDI flow into that country. But I think it is positive for the country to have a FDI flow into that country that may help them to develop more effectively with more, I think, jobs and everything. I don't know if I answer all the questions.
Jafet.
I think for the FTA flow, well, into a developing country, some developing countries, I think they could have a better tax rates, should be better. They were working in transport and infrastructure. It's also important the potential for growth. I think that's why they're developing at that moment, and some companies like that type of things for the FDIs, for attracting FDIs that will make them bigger and competitive economies. And I think that's what I can say about developing countries with the FDI. I think they could offer better tax rates and exchange rates.
Yeah. So, there are certain things also, like here, for example, normally developing countries like FDI in manufacturing sector, because sometimes they think that foreign companies come with better technology or relatively new technology, so they can get new product and those kind of things, and they can attract a new product manufacturing and unique model products. And in their country, they think that where technology transfer happens when companies goes from developed countries to developing countries for manufacturing activities. So normally developing country governments like to attract FDI in manufacturing activities. But in services activities, in services industries, some developing country governments have reservation in in giving blanket permission to foreign companies. For example, banking sector is a services sector, insurance sector is a services sector. So governments in developing countries, they keep restrictions on FDI in services industries. They would say that they would give that you have to take permission, and subject to certain guidelines and conditions, you can operate in our country in service industries. But there are some restrictions, and sometimes you need to have a local partner joint venture if you want to come with FDI in services industries. And in case if it is banking, they keep some number of branches you can open in a year. So even if you don't have local partner, they give permission to the banks. That is also banks opening branches in a foreign country is also an example for FDI. But governments, some governments in developing countries keep restrictions on such things, that how many branches you can open if you are a foreign bank. So likewise, so, but manufacturing, they are relatively liberal and lenient, but in services industries, Governments in developing countries are relatively strict. And from foreign companies' point of view, they will also look at several factors. They will look at the market size of the developing country. They will look at infrastructure facility in the developing country. They will look at easiness of doing business, like government rules, and they will also look at political risk factor. There are index numbers like global political risk index. They will look at that. They will look at market potential index. They will look at such kind of indicators, and they will decide based on that. Yeah. So now question number 2. So we move on to Gabriel, Noberto, and Wilfredo. Question number 2, multinational enterprises, So this you can answer with reference to the role of multinational enterprises. Do small companies invest in the form of FDI, or only multinational companies invest in the form of FDI? And what do you think about sources of FDI? The main source of FDI is supposed to be multinational enterprises. You think that medium scale enterprises can also invest in FDI, in the form of FDI in different industries? Or in what sectors probably medium scale enterprises or small scale enterprises can also think about FDI as part of their growth strategy? Or is it easy for them to think about FDI, at least in some countries, if not in all countries? Yeah, so we have 3 people to discuss this question.
I mean, so in terms of the role as a general, it's multinational companies basically are defined when they basically invest in foreign nations. So it's basically they're the medium of FDI. They're the way by which FDI happens. In terms of if medium sized companies could also become or actually invest in foreign nations and participate in FDI. Sure, I mean, to the extent that you don't define them as multinationals as soon as they invest in another nation, but it's always it's part of their cycle. They will eventually, if they grow enough, they will eventually will want to expand into other markets, and by definition, they will need to do FDI. So, in which sense? Well, it's fairly common. For example, for companies, some medium-sized companies that I know of, either to go to China and develop or buy from distributors there. They are not necessarily establishing themselves there, but they, for example, furniture, they do acquire it and bring it here. And I've also known of some other companies that establish tiny operations of manufacturing in Colombia, Venezuela, when it was viable to produce T-shirts or clothing in general, and bring it back. In that case, it was actual investment. They were establishing small operations in those countries because it was the transportation or the access was fairly accessible, and manufacturing cost was extremely low. So those are the examples that come to mind.
Okay, so
Well,
Wilfredo.
yeah. The multinational companies have a role as, like, for example, that when they enter a foreign country to produce the same products they produce at their home. What I'm saying is that the companies will face some factors, like how I said on the beginning, the example of companies like cement and soft drink, they will face unprofitable investment because the transportation cost will be high. So in that case, those multinational companies that they are of that industry will face those challenges, they will not be possible for them to have the FDI to make the investment.
Mhm.
Yeah, in my case, I think that multinational corporations um, play the primary role in FDI because of their nature in their operations and in their form of operating their business. And also multinational corporations have the resources to invest in these countries that sometimes small companies or medium-sized companies still don't have the necessary resources to move their operations to other places. And yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so small companies normally do exporting, so they are not really always into export FDI because they don't have the resources and capabilities, and they don't have the manpower to undertake FDI. Because to undertake FDI, you need to have efficiency, you need to have productivity, you need to have competent people, you need to have financial resources, you need all those kind of things. But some small companies, after they prove that they are good in exporting and all, they get into a FDI also, because when they have an interest to grow further and further, some specific market, they might do FDI in some countries on an experiment basis. Even if they don't expand into every other country, they expand into some countries. But multinational companies, they try to expand into several countries or many countries. But small companies, sometimes they do FDI in just 1 or 2 countries, or medium scale companies might do FDI in a couple of countries, not many countries. This is how the pattern works. Yeah, so with these remarks, I would like to wind up, but in case if you have any discussion, any point, any question, I can answer right now. And then after that, we can take break. Any questions? Pagundo. Mm-hmm. If there are no questions, I would like to ask you a question before we take a break. So we have seen the article on Japanese government's policy to encourage Japanese companies to move out from China. This is a FDI switch, so they all have FDI in China. They are moving out, or they are in the process of moving out from China. Do you think that it is good for Japanese companies, or do you think that this is going to this is going to be a challenge for Japanese companies, or this is going to be a challenge as far as China is concerned? So who is going to be the beneficiary? What do you think? The beneficiaries would be Japanese companies, or beneficiaries would be Chinese people?
I think China is going to have the biggest impact in economic terms because well, it's manufacturing. The companies are moving out of the nation, but companies are having the incentive from the government to move their operations to other places.
Mm-hmm.
I have doubts if this will be like long term, or the companies will just stay outside of China. But I think I also see that they are seeking, they offering 23.5 billion yen for those seeking to move production to other countries, not only Japan, and that seems interesting to me. But I have doubts if this is long term and if it will be really a benefit for countries to just move because of this help.
Are you expecting American companies moving out from China and switching back the production to America, or moving production to some other countries? A lot of American companies have FDI in China. What do you think? What is going to happen?
Well, I think some of them are definitely gonna move, but I don't think all of them. Like, well, it depends. What's what the company does, and if it really benefits them.
US government is also in the process of announcing certain measures to help American companies to survive if they move out from China. US government is also in the process of doing that. There was election, so there was no immediate announcement, specific announcement, even though there was some discussions and talks going on. So, but otherwise, I would expect that the US government will come out with certain policy guidelines and certain diplomatic decisions in relation to American companies in China. This is going to happen. What do you think? So what is going to be the consequences if that happens?
Well, it could also bring American companies back to the US and at some point specifically to Puerto Rico. So that would be great.
Do you think that they will move back to America, or they will go to some other countries instead of China? I mean, for producing.
I think there's other factors here. It's not only this help, like workforce and all the things long term that these companies have to see if they really have benefit of moving back to US.
I do not expect that all companies will move back their production facility to the US because they have interest to sell in Asia, because Asia is a very populous region. So one of the alternative or next best alternatives, so for many American companies would be switching our production from China to some other Asian country. If they have a long-term business interest in sales or international marketing in Asian countries, they need a production unit in Asia, somewhere in Asia, because otherwise geographically transportation costs from exporting from America to Asian countries will be very high. So they need production facilities in Asia. So I mean, so they might need to find some other facilities, some other locations in Asian countries in case if they decide to move out. So simply packing bag and coming back to home in America may not be a right solution. So if American government gives them millions of dollars for doing that, some of them might do it. But in case if government is not going to give millions of dollars, companies will not do that. They might, some of them might end up staying in China. Some of them might end up being in China in case if diplomatic relationship remains peaceful. But in case if diplomatic relationship doesn't remain peaceful, which we'll have to wait and see actually, because now everybody is keeping calm and quiet, and probably there could be some shocks after everyone get vaccination and those kind of things. So we have to wait and see that diplomatic actions. But otherwise, there will be some restructuring. I'm expecting some restructuring in some industries, some sectors. Yeah. So any other viewpoints from your side? You keeping silence? So you guys are not opening up your camera, so I'm not sure everyone is around there. So in case if you are around there, you have to participate in the class discussion. Any other point or any question that you would like to discuss? Okay, if there is no other point and no question, then I would assume that you have learned everything about FDI. And in that case, we can take a break